Hello everyone, welcome to Study with Bhadra. In this chapter, we are going to explore how India's boundaries have continuously changed throughout history. Why did this happen? Because many different kings and kingdoms ruled here. Sometimes rulers fought amongst themselves, sometimes alliances were formed, and many times one king captured another's land. This is why India's political maps, shape, and boundaries keep changing again and again throughout the history. Let's begin with a picture given in your book. It shows an aerial view of the Qutub Minar complex in Delhi. This is how the Qutub Minar complex looks from above. Remember, this site is in Delhi and it marks the beginning of the period we are going to study. Big questions of the chapter. Now, what are the important questions we will be able to answer after studying this chapter? How did foreign invasions and the rise of new dynasties reshape India's political boundaries? Invasion means to attack or assault. We will see how these invasions changed the political map of India. How did Indian society respond to these invasions? What was the reaction of the people when foreign rulers attacked? How did India's economy adapt during times of political instability? Political instability means when rulers change very quickly, when one dynasty rises, expands, then declines, and another takes its place. We will study how the economy adjusted and survived in such uncertain times. What impact did all this have on the lives of ordinary people? How did it affect farmers, traders, craftsmen, and common citizens? These are the big questions that will guide our journey through this chapter. Timeline of events 1200 to 1800. Now let's look at the timeline given in your book. This chapter covers a period of about 600 years from 12,000 CE to 18,000 CE. Here are some of the most important events you will study. 12,006 Establishment of Delhi Sultanate. 1326 The Mewar Kingdom was re-established. It has first been founded around the 6th century. 1336 Foundation of the Vijayanagar Empire. 1398 Timur's attack on Delhi. 1498 Arrival of the Portuguese in India. 1526 First Battle of Paniput, Babur's victory and beginning of the Mughal Empire. 1565 Battle of Talikota, in which the city of Vijayanagar was destroyed. 1556 Second Battle of Paniput, Akbar's decisive victory. 1576 Battle of Haldigati, where Maharana Pratap's forces had to retreat. 1671 Battle of Saraigat, where the Ahoms defeated the Mughals. 1699 Formation of the Khalsa by Guru Gobind Singh. 1754 Beginning of Maratha control over Delhi. 1799 Establishment of the Sikh Empire. By studying this timeline, we can clearly understand the order and sequence of historical events. The period we are studying, the period in this chapter and also in the next one, is often called the latter part of the medieval period of Indian history. Remember, Indian history is divided into three broad phases: ancient history, medieval history, and modern history. And in this chapter, we are looking at the final phase of medieval period, when kingdoms rose and fell and India's political map kept changing. Medieval history in India began roughly in the 8th century, around the year 700 CE, and it continued for about 1000 years. Up to the 18th century, 1800 CE, within this long period, historians usually divide medieval history into two parts. From 700 to 1200 CE, this is known as the early medieval period, and from 1200 to 1800 CE, this is known as the latter medieval period or the final phase of medieval history. And friends, in this chapter, we are going to study exactly this latter medieval period, those 600 years from 1200 to 1800, a time of foreign invasions, new dynasties, changing kingdoms, and reshaping of India's political map. Now, friends, let's understand the term medieval. The word medieval actually means between two ages. In Hindi, it is called Madhyakalin. You can easily remember this from the word middle. Middle means something that lies between two things. Since this period comes between ancient and modern history, this is called the middle period or the medieval period. The origin of the term medieval. Did you know that the word medieval was not first used in India? It was originally applied to European history. In Europe, historians used it to describe the period after the fall of the Roman Empire, around the 5th century CE, and before the beginning of the Renaissance, the Great Cultural Revival in the 14th to 16th century. So, in Europe, the medieval period stretched roughly from 500 CE to 1300 CE. What is Renaissance? The Renaissance was a period of cultural revival in Europe. During this time, people rediscovered the art, literature, and ideas of the ancient Greeks and Romans. It marked the beginning of a new age in Europe, full of creativity, science, and learning. Applying it to India. Later, historians borrowed this term and applied it to Indian history as well. So, in India, the medieval period is considered the time between ancient and modern history. It began about 8th century, 700 CE, and continued up to 18th century, 1700 CE, making it a period of about 1000 years. So, friends, whenever you hear the word medieval, remember it means the middle period. In India, it is from the 8th century to the 18th century, between ancient and modern history. Friends, earlier historians used to think that the medieval period was a kind of dark age. Why did they call it that? Because, according to them, this was the period before the rise of modern science, and they believed not much progress or development happened during this time. Europe versus India. But here we must remember Europe's history and India's history are very different. In Europe, historians considered the medieval period a dark age because after the fall of the Roman Empire, progress slowed down. Only later, during the Renaissance, 14th to 16th century, did Europe see a great revival in art, culture, and learning. This is when the real progress began. But in India, it was not the same. Our culture and agriculture remained very rich even in the medieval period. Many scientific and intellectual developments continued here. Important temples, forts, palaces, and cultural traditions were built and nurtured during this time. So, while in Europe medieval was seen as a backward or dark, In India, the medieval period was also a time of creativity, growth, and achievements. Using the term medieval in India, this is why historians say it is not always correct to use the same term medieval for both Europe and India. Also, in India, historians do not fully agree on the exact years of the medieval period. Some historians mark different beginning and end points. So we can say there is no single definition of when the medieval period began and ended in India for our study. But for our studies in 8th, we will use the term medieval period to mainly mean the time between 11th century 1000 CE and 17th century 1700 CE. And in this chapter, we will focus on the later medieval period, the second half, when India's political map kept changing due to invasions, battles, and new rise of kingdoms. So, friends, remember in Europe, medieval was seen as a dark age before modern science and Renaissance. In India, the medieval period was different. It was full of cultural richness and important developments. Historians may not all agree on exact dates, but for us, medieval means roughly from the 11th to 17th century. Okay, friends, so now let us be very clear about the time period we are covering. In this chapter, we are studying a span of 700 years from 1200 CE to 1800 CE. This is the part of what we call it the medieval period of Indian history. What is the medieval period in Indian history? Ideally, the context of Indian history, most historians consider the medieval period to stretch from 8th century to 18th century CE. That is from around the year 700 to 1800 CE. Within this long period of 1000 years, historians often divide it into two parts. Early medieval period from about 700 to 1200 CE, roughly 500 years. Later medieval period from 1200 to 1800 CE, about 600 years. But remember, there are differences of opinion among historians. Some book may start or end the medieval period at a slightly different dates. Some historians use the division depending on the events they consider important. So there is no fixed agreement on the exact days. But for our studies, we will follow the simple division. 700 to 1200 CE, early medieval. 1200 to 1800 CE, later medieval. So remember, medieval period in India, 700 to 1800 CE, about 1000 years. We divide into two, early and later. We are going to study the later part, the final 600 years. Friends, before we actually begin the main part of the chapter, there are a few things you should remember about how to read and understand history. Dates in history. In your class 7 history book, one of the chapters was titled Tapestry of the Past. In those chapters, we tried to keep as few dates as possible. Why? Because we wanted you to focus only on those dates that serve as important reference points in history, not on memorizing too many numbers. That's why in this book also you will find timelines. It will be very helpful for you if you keep revisiting those timelines again and again. Maps in history. Along with timelines, you should also keep looking at the maps given in your book. These maps will help you visualize geography, the lands crossed by armies, the routes used by traders and merchants, the journey of scholars and spiritual figures. So, timelines and maps are like tools that make it easier for you to understand history. Spellings in history. Now, there is one more thing you need to keep in mind. Sometimes, while reading, you may notice that the same names are spelled differently in different places. Why does this happen? because many words in medieval Indian history were originally written in Persian script called Farsi. When these words were transcribed, converted into Roman script, that is, into English letters, the spellings sometimes came out differently. That's why in your book you will sometimes see alternative spellings written in brackets. For example, Khilji or Khilji both mean the same dynasty. For the word Mughal, you may also see spellings like Mughal or Moghul. All these refer to the same empire, only the spellings are different. So don't get confused. These are just different ways of writing the same names. Summary of this section. Focus on important dates only, not every date. Keep revising the timelines and maps in your book. Don't get confused by different spellings. They often mean the same person or dynasty, just written differently because of translation from Persian to English. Alright, friends, let's begin our main chapter. The 11th century. A new era begins. A new era in India's journey began in the early 11th century.
If this topic is clear to you, please share your feedback in the comments. Based on your response, I'll prepare the upcoming topics from this chapter. Stay tuned, and feel free to let me know if you need further clarification. I'll be happy to help. Thank you.